Welcome to RealScary, the home of true scary stories, where we bring you the most unnerving of content, from British ghost stories to the most gruesome of murders. So if you are quite partial to a scary story, you're in the right place. A quaint little village nestled away in the countryside of East Yorkshire, England, is the subject of today's story. Now, on the surface, this little village is no different from any other village throughout England. However, this village hides a secret, and a secret that anyone choosing to visit should be aware of. This is the story of the Welwick Hitchhiker. Welwick is a village and civil parish in the East Riding of Yorkshire in England, and which also has very strong ties to the famous Gunpowder Plot of 1605. The Gunpowder Plot was a failed attempt by plotters to blow up the House of Lords by way of placing large amounts of gunpowder underneath the chambers, and when the time was right, the most recognisable name among the plotters is that of Guy Fawkes, but there was also two lesser known brothers among the plotters by the names of John and Christopher Wright. Both John and Christopher were born, raised and are buried in Welwick. On one cold misty December night in 1985, a man by the name of Dennis Wilkinson unwittingly agreed to work late at Rowbottom Farm where he worked. Dennis finished work at approximately 9 p.m, got in his car and began his usual drive home. However, this was a journey that would stay with Dennis for the rest of his life. Dennis recalls with great clarity the events that took place on that cold December night in 1985. He was slowly driving along the B1445 road due to the foggy weather conditions and was approaching the traffic lights alongside St Mary's Church in Welwick, when all of a sudden he heard the most almighty thud. Dennis slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car, convinced he had hit someone. But upon checking, and checking again, bizarrely there was nothing to be found. He checked the front of his car, all looked in order, as did the tyres. A little confused, Dennis got back in his car and continued his journey along the lonely B1445 road. When all of a sudden he heard a cough come from the back of the vehicle. Dennis immediately pulled over, switched on the interior light, turned round and looked in the back, where terrifyingly there was now a man sat with his head looking down and dressed in what Dennis describes as Guy Fawkes clothing. Dennis asked the man, "Who are you? What do you want?" But the dark figure did not respond. Dennis again asked, "Who are you?" Again, the dark figure did not respond. Dennis then ordered the man out of the car, but once again, the dark figure did not respond. Dennis, now angry, got out of the car, opened the back door and ordered the man to get out. But before Dennis could finish his sentence, he realised that the dark figure was no longer in the back of the car. It had suddenly disappeared into thin air. In an understandably terrified state, Dennis jumped back in his car, locked all the doors and rapidly sped off home. Upon arrival at his home, he informed his wife of what had just taken place, and it was agreed that the incident needs to be reported to the police. However, after contacting the police, Dennis was told he was not the only person to have made the same report of the same dark figure at the same location. A newly appointed nurse by the name of Maria Gainford, who lived in the neighbouring village of Skeffling, had a very similar encounter in 2001. Maria says, "I remember it as if it happened yesterday. It was a drab December night, and I finished my shift at Hull Royal Infirmary just after 10 p.m. On my drive home, I remember waiting what seemed like an eternity for the traffic lights to change near St Mary's Church in Welwick. Eventually, however, they did change, and off I went. Then all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like a cough from the back of the vehicle. It really made me jump," Maria recalls. "I looked round and I literally froze on the spot. There was a man sat there, dressed from head to toe in black clothing, wearing an old-fashioned hat, and was just pointing forward. Hysterically, I opened the door and ran the remaining distance to my home, which luckily was only a short distance. I returned to my car, which was still running and at the side of the road with my husband. And whatever or whoever it was in the back of my car was no longer there. It was the most terrifying incident I have ever witnessed," Maria recalls. I mentioned the incident to some of the locals in my village the following morning, who nonchalantly informed me that this was quite a common encounter, and that the dark figure, who uninvitedly hitched a lift in the back of my car, was the ghost of a Mr. John Wright, making his way back to his home in Welwick. And upon investigating, it is factually recorded that John Wright and his brother Christopher, both born, lived and are buried in Welwick, and were killed by the Sheriff of Worcester on the 8th of November 1605 for their participation in the Gunpowder Plot. Needless to say, neither Dennis nor Marie ever took that route via St Mary's Church home again. So, if you are ever in East Yorkshire, on the lonely B1445 road, and you suddenly hear a thud, whatever you do, don't look round. Thank you for joining me in our latest edition of Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did enjoy, I would ask that you like, share and subscribe. And as always, be safe and sweet dreams.